Greetings, I'm Moreno wishing you a happy Kwanzaa. And to bring in the Kwanzaa right, we're going to look at 7 Blaxploitation films. Now, you might be thinking, oh, you mean films like Sweet Sweetback, Slaughter, Coffee, Black Caesar, Shaft, Blackula, and Superfly. No, I've decided to pick 7 others, so deal with it. The first one would be one that you may not consider to be a Blaxploitation film, but if you really think about it, it is. It is the 1970 sequel to In the Heat of the Night, entitled They Call Me Mr. Tibbs, starring Cine-cool, a bit more of a straightforward cop thriller, just with Virgil Tibbs as the main character. So it's nowhere near as good as its predecessor. Next we jump to 1973 with Shaft in Africa. Once again, I didn't go with the original Shaft, nor did I go with Shaft's Big Score, both of which were directed by Gordon Parks, but instead I decided to go with the one directed by John Gillerman, who, as you may or may not know, directed the 1976 King Kong. Of the 4 Shaft films, this is my personal favorite, even though the first one's far more of a legitimately good film. When it comes to exploitation films, the more shameless the better. Speaking of shameless, let's talk about a Blaxploitation crossover film from the same year, Live and Let Die. Yes, the James Bond film, the first one, had Roger Moore in it. It also has Yaphet Kotto in it. But the original Ian Fleming novel is just utterly racist. The film is far more in the mold of the Blaxploitation film. It even has Gloria Hendry as the first African-American Bond girl. While we're on Gloria Hendry, let's consider Hell Up in Harlem, the 1973 sequel to the previous year's Black Caesar, which was a Blaxploitation remake of Little Caesar. Even though it feels completely superfluous, it's still loads of fun. It doesn't quite make sense, but it's filled with far more ridiculous action sequences. Director Jack Hill provided his sort of spiritual follow-up to the film Coffee with the film Foxy Brown in 1974, once again starring Pam Grier. It was originally intended as a sequel, but then at the last minute they decided to make it a standalone story instead. Foxy Brown also has Antonio Fargas in it, who will be coming up in one of our later films. Plus, it's one of the great examples of 1970s revenge movies, as well as 1970s feminist exploitation. Now, even though I'm not covering the Blackula films, which starred William H. Marshall, I am covering another film featuring that actor, 1974's Abby. Once again, a Blaxploitation horror film, and this one emulating The Exorcist to the point that American International Pictures was actually sued over it. It stars Carol Speed as a woman who is possessed by an African sex demon. I would say, though, that it feels like a more legitimate follow-up to The Exorcist than, say, Exorcist 2. For the final candle on our Canara, we're going to light up I'm Gonna Get You, Sucker, from 1988, directed by Keenen Ivory Wayans, a parody of the Blaxploitation films, which is far more successful, at least as a parody, than his later, more financially successful film, Scary Movie, ended up being. In addition to starring Keenen Ivory Wayans and some of his brothers, it has Antonio Fargas, who we already previously mentioned was in Foxy Brown, as well as Isaac Hayes, who provided the original theme for Shaft. Those are just a random sampling of all the great Blaxploitation films out there. They're all fun. I mean, you just have to be in the right mood for it. You know, you have to be hip, you have to be jive, you have to be things I'm not. But I will tell you that I am still the cool, the Cine-cool. What can we learn from Kwanzaa and from the Blaxploitation era? Even though, to a certain degree, the 1960s and 1970s Black Power movement, which came out of the Civil Rights movement of the early 60s, it may seem a bit quaint and outdated now in this post-Bill Cosby era. You have to take in the right spirit of people who are finally getting to put themselves out there and be the front and center. And that's always a rough place to start. And so you can't judge these films by modern ideas of political correctness, but rather you have to take them as fun statements of liberation